All right. Hello and welcome back to Anatomy and Physiology here with your professor, Dr. Shawn Clavell. Today we're covering the chapter titled Muscular System. And so this chapter I'm going to break up into some major concepts. And so the first concept here that we're going to talk about is some definitional terms. So we're going to define the term agonist. We'll define the term antagonist. We'll also define the term synergist. We'll also talk about how a muscle's location, how the location relative to the joint specifically can actually affect motion. So, it kind of flows with the concept of sliding filament theory, where muscles shorten, and so as an action causes force, it'll cause the muscle to move into a shorter position, bringing the two bones closer together. And so, depending on where those muscles locate, give us an idea of what actions occur as a result. So, let's first talk about kind of how these muscles act. And so, most body movements are the result of two or more muscles that are acting either together or against each other. And so, we'll see that here in our next slide. And the first concept is that of a prime mover, or what might be known as an agonist. Now, a prime mover or an agonist is the muscle that is most responsible for a particular movement. So, the classic example that we're seeing here is the example of the biceps brachii, that is. And so the biceps brachii is responsible. It sits on the anterior. It also gives us a little idea of kind of that relative position. It sits on the front of your arm and is responsible for flexing the elbow. So the motion here that occurs when the forearm gets closer to the humerus is flexion. So this is referred to as elbow flexion. And so the biceps is the prime mover or the agonist for elbow flexion or flexing of the arm. Now, what you'll see here as well is that not only is there going to be a muscle that is, we'll give this a different color, not only is there going to be a muscle that is contracting and shortening, you can see here in the picture, when the elbow flexes, the biceps is going to shorten or flex. But try that again. There's also going to be a muscle that is going to be lengthening and relaxed. So let me give you an idea of this concept here, just visually. So we mentioned the bicep is going to be the one that's responsible for flexing the elbow, causing the forearm to become closer to the humerus. But there on the opposite side, you have a muscle that is lengthening and as a result is relaxed, right? So again, it's kind of allowing this motion to occur. But if you're not familiar, this is a muscle called the triceps. Right? So while the biceps is contracting and shortening, your triceps muscle is lengthening and relaxing. So in this scenario, the biceps is the prime mover, whereas the triceps is the antagonist muscle. This is the muscle that is producing the opposite effect. So we can think of it as being the elbow extensor, right? It extends the elbow. But we can also consider it to be the antagonist or the muscle that is relaxed and lengthening when the biceps is contracting. So the antagonist is the muscle that is lengthening and relaxed when the opposite muscle, the muscle opposite is, or the agonist is contracting. And then it would do the opposite, right? So if the, let me see here if I could jump too far. But if I had an example here of extension, the biceps would be relaxed as the tricep would be contracting. Maybe we can just draw it here. Right? So, in this case, in this scenario, we're gonna have a we're gonna have the triceps that is contracting, causing the elbow to extend in this case, whereas the bicep muscle will be lengthening. And again, that forearm motion is gonna come this way, extension. So biceps is the antagonist in elbow extension. So it produces the opposite effect. Let's call that. We'll call this the. In this case, whereas the triceps would be our agonists. So there's the concept there. Now we've got one more definition for us. That last definition is that of a synergist. A synergist is a muscle that aids in a particular action. So if we zoom in here, we'll see two muscles that are synergist to the biceps. So elbow flexion. Again, this is an example of perhaps picking up a glass or a cup and bringing it to your mouth. You'd bend your elbow just like you would here. You'd also bend your elbow in this scenario here. But the two muscles that are helping the biceps brachii, there's the prime mover, the biceps brachii there. Here's the other prime idea here, but the other muscle is a little bit deeper, so you won't see. So the muscle first here, the brachioradialis, is a synergist in the fact that it starts down at the distal humerus and goes all the way down to the styloid process of the radius here, and ultimately crosses the elbow. And as a result, it is an elbow flexor. As well, the muscle brachialis, we'll make that red. Brachialis is a muscle that inserts into the anterior third of the anterior distal third of the humerus and right into the coronoid fossa of the ulna. So you can see here that that muscle also crosses the elbow joint, and as a result, it is an elbow flexor as well. It crosses the elbow joint from the front. So as a result, it is an elbow flexor as well. And so clear off my board and get back to this concept here. So we've defined the agonist, antagonist, and synergist muscles, and hopefully I've been able to infer a little bit about the actions. But let me start by introducing uh, three rules of muscles that I'm commonly used to help identify and uh, describe actions of muscles. And so the first is that muscles only contract and relax. And we've seen that in sliding filament theory. There's no way that muscles um, are going to push, right? Maybe a better way to say that is that muscles pull, they don't push. And so when a muscle contracts, it brings the two bones together. It never pushes two bones apart. And so they only work on the joints that they cross, and that muscles work in the direction of their fibers or the fascicular arrangement. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in another section here. But the concept of muscles acting upon the joints that they cross is a prime example here in the previous slides. So, first, the concept that muscles and their location are going to give us a big idea as to what the action is. So you can see that muscles here on the front of the arm, like that of the biceps, or maybe even if we go to the other slides, we'll see muscles like biceps, brachii, brachioradialis, and even brachialis and brachioradialis. Excuse me, got a lot of those tongue twisters in there. But all of those muscles there sit in the front or the anterior aspect of the arm, and they cross the elbow joint. And so all of these muscles, as a result, will be responsible for elbow flexion. So the location of the muscles gives us insight into the idea of what their action is. So again, this concept here of the biceps brachii, this is the example of the biceps brachii here in the slide. And so what we have is a muscle that starts clear up into the shoulder. It stops all the way down at the what is that? The serradius, the radial tuberosity. And you can see here's the elbow joint it crosses. It also crosses the shoulder joint in the front. So this muscle would be helpful or responsible for flexing the elbow because it crosses the elbow joint, but also for flexing the shoulder, pulling the shoulder forward as well. The third rule of muscles that I like also helps us to identify the actions of muscle because they work best in their fiber arrangement or their direction. And so if we look at a muscle like, let's go with like the muscle like the trapezius here, you can see that uh, the artist here gives us a idea that this muscle has fibers that run kind of in this diagonal pattern here that run in this parallel pattern right into the spine and even in this downward pattern here as well. So you can see here that the fiber arrangement gives us an idea of the line of pull, right? Like it pulls where these muscles are going to pull. And so I've provided some in many of your uh, muscle charts, you'll see that there is this action, right? This line of pull that gives us the idea of where these muscles are going to go. So in the concept of like the trapezius, there's those three fibers. They're going to pull together, so it's going to bring the head down towards there or even bring the shoulder up towards the head. This one is very likely going to bring your shoulder blade together, so scapular retraction and even a little bit of scapular depression. Ultimately, around this pivot, you're going to get a rotation, but the main concepts here is it might cause a little bit of scapular elevation as well as retraction and even depression as well on certain fibers, particular fibers. So again, we could take a look at that here real fast. So this might be the actions here of, let's see, I'm not even sure. The upper fibers, right? So the upper fibers are going to play that one more time here. Uh, where those muscles are starting from the top, they're going to pull up here. And so this is the concept of the upper fibers that are pulling in this direction, right? And the head stays stable, but it's going to pull the shoulder blade up towards the head. The lower fibers are going to pull downward, as you can see there. Let me play that one more time. The lower fiber is going to pull downward. And then finally, see if I got the retraction fibers, right? The more the middle fibers here, the fibers responsible for the middle are going to give us that retraction. And so again, we're looking at that where those muscles are pulling, what's their line of pull, and what is the location in relative to the joint. So if they're in the front, they're often going to do flexion for the upper extremities, as we saw here with some of our examples, uh, like the bicep. If they're located in terms of like the back, they'd be extensors. And so again, it's always going to be relative to the anatomical position as well. So we need to always remember that. But in closing here, we'll talk further about some other muscular concepts, including how muscles are named, a little bit more about that fiber arrangement, and the concept of how muscles interact with the skeletal system to actually create force.